The Peacock Committee, set up by the government 14 months ago to examine alternative methods of financing the BBC, has decided that advertising is not the answer. But in its 219-page report published this morning, it recommends that the BBC should have the option of selling off Radio 1 and Radio 2, which could then be supported by advertisements. The committee says that in the immediate future, the licence fee should be index-linked to the general rate of inflation. New television sets should be designed to take a pay-as-you-view credit card system. Pensioners on supplementary benefit should get licence-free radio and television. And a separate fee of not less than £10 should be charged for car radios. Among the other recommendations, the committee wants the BBC to take over the collection of fees. It could then invite tenders from interested organisations who could collect the money and enforce payment procedures. But the committee favours a system of payment as part of the electricity bill every quarter. The committee suggests that the unused periods at night on BBC television and ITV between 1 a.m. and 6 a.m. should be sold off, and the ITV franchises should go to auction, although there should be a formal annual review by the IBA to monitor performances. The government's view of the report was set out in the Commons this afternoon by the Home Secretary, Mr. Douglas Hurd. He said the proposals had profound implications for all broadcast services, and they deserved careful study. The government, he said, would welcome any comments. But from the Labour front bench, Mr. Gerald Kaufman called the committee's conclusions a mess. He said it was a case of ask a silly question and you'll get a silly answer. Our first report is from our arts correspondent, John Parry, who was at the news conference in London this morning, at which members of the Peacock Committee outlined their proposals for the future of broadcasting.
There were clear divisions of opinion on the committee on several of the major issues in the report, not least the majority rather than unanimous recommendation that Radios 1 and 2 should be privatised. Miss Judith Chalmers and Mr. Alistair Hetherington were particularly concerned about the potentially dangerous effect on several of the already financially shaky commercial stations. Miss Chalmers also felt that privatisation would give more strength to television. On the other hand, Lord Quinton described Radios 1 and 2 as muzak at an airport, and felt they could be dispensed with without affecting Radios 3 and 4. Professor Peacock agreed.
Radio 4 has a very specific and important public service broadcasting. It is the national service, as I remember it, and it used to be called that. Radio 3, I think, is a rather different situation. In fact, I myself think there's a case for Radio 3 being financed almost by voluntary subscription by the cognoscenti. I would very willingly subscribe to what for me would be the amount of the license fee to Radio 3, provided, of course, other people would do the same.
As for auctioning off the ITV franchises, Mr. Hetherington described the idea as daft and damaging, and pointed out that the IBA would be in the difficult situation of choosing between television companies with a long and honourable record of programme making and newcomers with a lot more money to spend. Again, opposing him, Lord Quinton described the present system as a comfortable duopoly with extreme imperfections, and Mr. Sam Britton said that the present system of handing out the franchises on a nod and a wink was indefensible. Listening to them arguing at the news conference to launch the report, it was sometimes hard to understand how the 7 members of the committee had managed to come up with a single report. Its recommendations really fall into 3 stages, with such things as the index-linked licence fee, the £10 car radio licence, and free television licences for pensioners on supplementary benefits, all part of Stage 1. Stage 2 looks into the 1990s, where the committee sees direct subscription as a viable alternative to the licence, and in the 21st century it would lead to a wide range of programmes on systems including cable and satellite. Fears that much of the programming may become too expensive for everyone to pay for were brushed aside by Professor Peacock.
All of us would like, of course, to have everything as free goods, but there's absolutely no reason why this should be the case. I mean, people then can pay what they want. There's absolutely no reason at all why they should. They might want to pay less, they might want to pay more. It gives them the freedom of choice. At the moment, what happens is they have to pay a license fee, whatever they watch, and if they don't watch BBC, they still have to pay it.
Mr. Sam Britton agreed with him and said that people had an exaggerated idea of what the programmes might cost, but he did concede that it might be, as he put it, just a little expensive if people wanted to take full advantage of all the programmes on offer.
Next to Westminster, where the Home Secretary, Mr. Hurd, outlined the government's reaction to the Peacock report. Here's our political correspondent, John Sargent.
The government aren't rushing into any firm conclusions on the committee's report, and no legislation on this subject is expected before the next election. The Home Secretary restricted himself to general comments. On the main recommendation to reject advertising, Mr. Hurd would only say that the government could not lightly put aside the committee's assessment. On the committee's longer-term aim of allowing a competitive broadcasting market to develop, Mr. Hurd said this fitted in well with the government's general philosophy. No conclusion had been reached on the suggestion that independent television franchises should be awarded by competitive tender, but the government did want to keep that option open for the next round of franchises due to start in 4 years' time. On the proposal for lifting the special regulations on broadcasters on the content of programmes, Mr. Hurd said any future arrangements would have to be at least as effective as those at present. For Labour, Gerald Kaufman rejected all the main proposals apart from that on advertising. He dismissed the report as a waste of time and money.
15 months after the Peacock Committee was set up, the problem of financing the BBC remains precisely as it was on March the 27th, 1985. Even the Prime Minister's pet solution of advertising on the BBC has been turned down. A collection of trustees, hand-picked to deliver the required answer, has failed to oblige. There'll be a few empty places in the honours list.
A similar point was made by other Labour MPs. Mr. Hurd rejected the suggestion that the committee had been set up by the government in order that they would recommend advertising.
Of course, if you appoint people of this quality to a committee, you do not do so because you know the answer they're going to come up with. That would be absurd. And my right honourable friend did not do that. What the committee has come up with is not an answer which is going to cause delight to any established interest or institution, and probably all the better for that. It's in a good tradition of public service committees and investigations in this kind.
For the SDP, Robert McLennan said the report contained far-reaching and imaginative proposals, and the Liberals welcomed the fact that for the present the licence fee would remain the principal source of BBC income.